vengeance. I'm also very late with this video, I'm sorry for that, but I wanted to see the movie a few times, but most importantly, I wanted to give you guys the review for this film, not the one that you needed, but the one that you deserved. Now let's talk about The Batman. It's the Batman's second year as the Caped Crusader as he investigates corruption and riddles from a serial killer known as the Riddler. The best way to describe the tone of this film is, it's a film noir detective version of Seven meets Taxi Driver with a vigilante aspect, but with Batman. And everything I just said is something I've wanted to see for ever in a Batman movie, and we got it. It's sort of surreal to even think about it. Within the first 5 minutes of this film, I knew it was going to be what I wanted to see, or at least the tone I've wanted to see for a very long time. One aspect I really enjoyed about this film is in one of the opening scenes, you start getting narration, some internal thoughts from Bruce Wayne himself, talking about what he's doing, and you're hearing his thoughts as he's writing them down in a journal. And I liked that. I liked hearing those internal things come to the forefront because that's one of my favorite things in films like, for example, American Psycho or Taxi Driver. I love characters that live with conflict every day, and to hear that internal narration pour out, it's sort of like having a front row seat to madness. You know, it's almost something like this. I use my Bang energy drink as a source of power, not because I want to, but because I have to. Yeah, something like that. One last thing I wanted to say about Bruce Wayne, aka Batman's internal monologue throughout this film is, it reminds me of a few other comic book films that share that same film noir vibe, such as Sin City, where you have the character of Marv sharing his thoughts and his opinions, or films like Watchmen, where you have the character of Rorschach sharing his internal thoughts about the criminal element in a seedy city. Very reminiscent to this movie.
This city's afraid of me. I've seen its true face.
Let's go back to the opening scene featuring Batman for the first time. Leading up to that, you understand the mindset of criminals. What he's doing does have an effect on them. They're afraid to go into the shadows. And the other thing this opening sequence does is it really establishes how grimy and dirty and corrupt and crime-ridden Gotham City really is. And Gotham City in this film reminded me of the city that Seven takes place in, which is an unnamed city. It's just rainy and grimy. And more or less, if you would make Brad Pitt Batman, Morgan Freeman Commissioner Gordon, and John Doe in that film, the Riddler, well, it's very similar. This version of Gotham City is so atmospheric and it feels like a real city with a pulse, and it's one of the best adaptations of Gotham City I've ever seen in a live-action Batman flick. I am vengeance. I am night. I am the guy from Twilight. Now let's get this out of the way. Robert Pattinson is Batman. He is my Batman now. Every time I saw him up on the screen wearing the cowl, never once did I think that's Robert Pattinson. I just thought that's Batman. Now sometimes when he's Bruce Wayne, which is only in a handful of scenes in this film, I'm like, oh, he's fine. Now he hasn't really established that persona, that billionaire playboy persona that we know Bruce Wayne as, and I think that'll come later. But right now, this interpretation, this version of Batman is almost addicted to fighting injustice. He's addicted to being Batman. That is who he is. Anything else is almost obligatory in this film because I like when he's out fighting crime and he comes back to Wayne Manor, which is all gothy and kind of like a little bit run down, but I liked that about it. But it's almost like I don't want to stop doing this. Like sleep is an obligation. And when he takes out these contact lenses that he uses to record what he's doing, they're almost like surveillance cameras that he puts in his eyes, which I liked that tech. His eyes are all bloodshot. He looks so, it looks like me after I'm up for 3 days making YouTube videos, drinking Bang energy drinks and playing Rocket League, and then I finally go to bed. That's what it reminded me of. And real quick, before we dive into vengeance, I want to give a mention to the sponsor of this video. Because if I was a crime-fighting vigilante, this is what I would take. Big thanks to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video. AG1 by Athletic Greens is a comprehensive all-in-one greens powder engineered to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet and support your body's nutritional needs across 4 pillars of health: gut health, immune support, energy, and recovery. It has 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens in one convenient daily serving.
It has a sweet, yet ever so slightly minty taste. It's sort of refreshing actually, and it's very smooth.
Most of you watching know I like to go to the gym, and I'm a huge advocate of supplements that work. And for the past month, I've been implementing AG1 by Athletic Greens into my daily routine. I just feel healthier drinking it. One of my favorite things about it are the energy supporting ingredients, which it has natural forming B12. AG1 also replaces an assortment of supplements taking over your cabinet. Go to the link in the description, athleticgreens.com/flickpick, to get a year's supply of vitamin DK3 2 and 5 travel packs for free with your first purchase. This is a game changer for supporting your immune system. AG1 provides your body with everything it needs for optimal performance every single day. Once again, in the description down below, check out athleticgreens.com/flickpit to get a year's free supply of vitamins DK3, 2, and 5 travel packs for free with your first purchase. Link down below, check it out. Real quick, before you think I'm fanboying out, I do have a lot of complaints and issues with this film, but we'll talk about those in just a few minutes. But that first introduction that we get to Batman in this film, where he walks out of the shadows to save some guy getting mugged in a subway, it sent chills down my spine. It made my nipples look like this right here. But the little detail I really liked about him walking out of those shadows was the sound that he makes every step that he takes. It almost sounded like a cowboy's spurs as he walks into a saloon to fight the bad guys. It's like cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. You could hear weight to his steps, because keep in mind, Batman's wearing a suit of armor essentially, so it makes sense from a logical standpoint. And also, if you really want to think into it, it's almost an intimidating sound. It's like you hear this weight and presence coming towards you, and if I was a villainous dude, I'd probably run away. When it comes to the title of this film, The Batman, it doesn't lie. 99.9% of this film features Batman or Bruce Wayne, and keep in mind, all those Bruce Wayne scenes are almost obligatory to the movie, because this is a full-fledged Batman film, and for that, it's like, thank you, you gave it to us. And during this film, when the first time I saw it, keep in mind, it's 3 hours long, I was like, okay, an hour in, I have to go pee really bad. I was like, there's gonna be a slow point where Batman's not on screen and I can go. Yeah, that slow point never happens, because Batman is always there. He's always investigating something. He's always doing something. The story is always going. So, yeah, next time I see a movie like this, I'm going to wear an adult-sized diaper so I don't have to get up. This is far and beyond the most Batman-centric Batman film we've ever had. And I'll just say, Batman one more time. Batman. And another thing I really enjoyed about the character of the Batman in this film was his arc, because it starts off where he's fighting crime in the shadows and using fear as a tool. And by the end of the film, he's out in the daylight, just being the symbol that people need, helping guide people to safety. And he doesn't necessarily have to beat criminals to a pulp to do it. He just needs to light a flare and guide them out of the darkness. And I thought that was beautiful. It was almost like symbolism at its finest. And it's just like Batman's in the sunlight now. And I really enjoyed that contrast. It put a smile on my face. And going into the next installment of new Batman movies directed by Matt Reeves, I think now Gotham City will look up to Batman rather than this mysterious vigilante. Now everyone's going to truly embrace him as this symbol of Gotham City and be behind him. I really enjoyed how he went from using fear as a tool to using hope to inspire Gotham City. And with all of that said, let's talk about how much Batman gets his ass kicked in this movie. He gets beat up, he gets blown up, he gets shot about 900 times, and he's still going. And I would say this is very ultra realistic at some points, and at other points, I would say Batman was on God mode, because there's a few sequences where he's just getting shot at by submachine guns. Like I just said, there's a sequence in this film where he gets blown up, and you would imagine maybe some kind of slight injury. I understand that he's wearing body armor, but, you know, maybe a slight third-degree burn over here. I don't know. For example, one of my favorite sequences in this film is when Batman is blown up, and then he wakes up in the GPD, and all the police are surrounding him, and they're like, well, what do we do with him? I don't quite know. And you can just feel the tension and hostility in the air. You can almost cut it with a knife. And the entire sequence following that, even talking about it, puts a smile on my face. But when he shoots his grappling hook up, he's flying to the rooftop of GPD, and he gets to the top and he ejects his wingsuit, and he looks down and he's like, ooh, shit, I've never jumped off of anything this high before. I really enjoyed that, because that solidifies the fact this is his second year of being a vigilante crime fighter, and he's never tried this before. And hey, if I had to jump off a building for the first time, I'd probably be a little bit scared too, and I loved that panic in his eyes right before he did it. And then he jumps off and he hasn't quite mastered the technique yet, so he crash lands on top of a bus and flies into a trash can. And I loved that, but I was hoping maybe like, oh, I hurt my leg, so now I'm gonna walk with a limp for the next few scenes. But no, he's Batman. No damage inflicted. Now, one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to the character of the Batman in this film is I want to talk about Batman's tech, because without Batman's tech, the Batmobile, the grappling gun, the wingsuit, the cape, the cowl, it's not Batman. And I enjoyed how simplistic and grounded the tech in this film was. Now, I previously mentioned the contacts that he uses as surveillance cameras when he's out fighting crime to sort of look back on and figure out riddles and things like that. I really enjoyed that, but here's the theory, and this is just from my brain to you guys. What if in the next installment of the next Batman film, those contacts, those surveillance cameras that he wears in his eyes, maybe malfunction, and they turn white for one sequence. So you get that true comic book version of Batman at some point in the next movie. And it would be a logical reason to have it. And when it comes to Batman's tech and gadgets, well, we have to talk about the Batmobile. And I really enjoyed this version of the Batmobile. It felt like an obtainable thing that some guy could create alone in his Batcave, or AKA this old subway station that is sort of like the Batcave. But either way, I liked how it was still under construction and it wasn't quite ready to go, but he sort of jumps the gun. And during the car chase scene, when you first get your introduction to the Batmobile revving up, and then it stalls out, I was like, oh, I liked that. That's a nice little touch. But speaking of the Batmobile, I really did enjoy the car chase sequence in this film. It sounded amazing in IMAX with the audio blasting into your ears. You almost felt like you were in the Batmobile chasing the Penguin down the highway. But the one thing I wanted to mention about that sequence was, I think like 87 people died, right? I mean, there was a 25 car pileup, there was a huge explosion. At least a few people had to die, right? Like a few people. And I like how Batman just gets out of his car, walks over to the Penguin, and he's like, okay, now I gotta interrogate you. It's like, what about, there's 87 people back there on fire, Batman, during this car chase sequence. No? Okay, Penguin, tell us how to speak Spanish. If justice is blind, let's talk about Paul Dano's the Riddler in this film. And I think when it comes to a sociopathic serial killer who uses riddles as clues to help progress his plan to make the corrupt of Gotham City pay, well, I think this was a good version of the Riddler, and I love me some Paul Dano. And this interpretation of the Riddler sort of felt like his performance in the movie Prisoners meets his performance in the film There Will Be Blood. And he combined those two things, and overall, I really did enjoy it. When it comes to the Riddler being the main antagonist in this film, I think this was the perfect villain to showcase in your first outing with this adaptation of Batman, because if you truly want to use those detective crime fighting skills, there's no other villain that can really push Batman to his limits to do that. But most importantly, the thing I really enjoyed about the character of the Riddler and Batman was they both wanted the same thing, but their means of doing it were just so different. They both grew up in Gotham City. They were wronged, and they wanted to make the corrupt and dirty politicians of Gotham City pay, except they just went about it so differently, and I liked that dynamic. And when it comes to the Riddler's master plan, which was sort of reminiscent to the master plan that John Doe had in Seven, even by the end of the movie, he turns himself in to get into the situation that he wants to be in, where he makes the hero of the film do something that he doesn't quite want to do. But either way, when it comes to his master plan, I like that he was leading Batman on along the way and utilizing him and making him his muscle that he couldn't be. And never once did the Riddler actually want to kill Batman. He never had any intention to kill Batman because he sort of saw himself and Batman working together, and I liked that. I actually thought for the most part it made a lot of sense, and I liked the twist by the end, where you assumed that he knew who Batman was and his secret identity, and even Batman himself thought he knew, but then it turns out he didn't. And I sort of liked that minor twist, and I know a lot of people who saw this movie still assume that he knows Batman's secret identity. He doesn't. He doesn't know who Batman is. It's okay. And the great thing about all of this is, and the thing I really liked was, the Riddler was never out to kill the Batman. He just wanted to use the Batman and work side by side with him to achieve what he needed to achieve. He never set one of his traps to capture the Batman or hurt him. That was never his goal or his intention. Now, he did want to kill Bruce Wayne, and he tried. I guess we can talk about that now. When it comes to the Riddler wanting to kill Bruce Wayne, I got the logic. It's like making a son pay for his corrupt father's sins. Thomas Wayne, he assumed, was corrupt. But the sequence where Andy Serkis, who plays Alfred in this film, opens up Bruce Wayne's mail and it's laced with C4 explosives and he blows up, I was like, whoa. They just did it. They killed Alfred. But no, 2 seconds later, he's in a hospital with a Band-Aid on his head, and he's like, I'm okay, it's okay. Here's the backstory and what happened, Bruce, I'll tell you. And for me, that was the first time in this 3-hour movie where it sort of took me out of it ever so slightly, because after this massive explosion, Alfred just has a little Band-Aid on his head, not even a first-degree burn, and he's okay. And I was like, I don't know. It felt like maybe he could have been on life support, barely clinging on, maybe with like third-degree burns on the side of his face. I just wish they would have pushed that a little bit further than they did. And super quick, when it comes to Andy Serkis playing Alfred in this film, I think it was an interesting casting choice. I liked him in the role. When it comes to their relationship in this film, it sort of felt like they took the highlight reel of their interactions in the Nolan trilogy and condensed it down into like 6 minutes in this film. That's just the way I sort of felt. But the one thing I did like about this adaptation of Alfred in this film was he does give the line where he's like, I taught you how to fight, because in the comics, well, his character actually was an ex-Green Beret who had combat fighting skills, so he sort of trained young Bruce Wayne to do some of the things he's doing in this movie, which makes sense. And one last thing I wanted to mention about the Riddler in this film was, at one point, it's revealed that he's communicating with all of his henchmen through this Discord. It's sort of like an OnlyFans for terrorism, where everyone's like, okay, well, do you need explosions and guns? Okay, I got you, brother. But in all fairness, logically speaking, it does explain how the Riddler obtains these goons by the end of the film to help support him taking down Gotham City. So, yeah. And speaking of villains, in this film, we get Colin Farrell playing the Penguin, who just looks unrecognizable as Penguin. And the thing I really enjoyed about the Penguin in this film was he wasn't pure evil. He was sort of like a middleman who's a little bit seedy, but he isn't really going over the top. He doesn't necessarily kill people, except in that fiery car crash getaway scene that we had earlier in the movie that we just pretend like no one died in. And I gotta give props to Penguin in this movie because he's way better at reading Spanish than Batman or Commissioner Gordon. He sort of helps solve one of the clues that saves the day in this movie, which I thought was a little bit contrived and odd, but nevertheless, I really enjoyed Colin Farrell as the Penguin in this movie. And when it comes to the Penguin, I'm a huge fan of Danny DeVito's Penguin from Batman Returns. I'll show my French flipper trick. Wah, 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 wah. Definitely an underrated villain. And now there's one last villain we have to talk about, and that's Carmine Falcone, played by John Turturro. And a lot of different subplots throughout this film revolve around his character because he is the criminal mastermind guy of Gotham City. I didn't dislike everything that they did. I just thought there was a little too much screen time dedicated to him, and some of the subplots were a little bit contrived or maybe slightly convoluted revolving around him. For example, there's one where he goes to Thomas Wayne back in the day because he's shot and he needs to be saved, so he goes to the richest man in Gotham City. He drives up to like his mansion to be saved. I was like, that's kind of odd. Like, that just felt odd. It's like, you're the biggest crime boss in Gotham City. You don't have like a guy who can fix a gunshot wound. But I understand they had to make a connection between him and Bruce Wayne. But my biggest complaint with his character and the entire subplot and storylines leading into the end of this film is it's finally revealed by the end of the movie, like it's some big unveil, that everyone was working for Carmine Falcone, the corrupt politicians and police officers. He wasn't working for them. They were working for him. It's like, yeah, I mean, I kind of just assumed it. He's the crime boss of Gotham City. I just assumed he had his fingers in everything that was corrupt and wrong. So I didn't think that unveil was that big of a surprise, and it sort of felt underwhelming to me. I don't know. Let me know if you feel the same way down below. And the final character I want to talk about in this film is the bat and the cat relationship, where you have Zoe Kravitz, who plays Catwoman. And I actually was pleasantly surprised by her in this movie. This was the one thing I wasn't quite sure of going into this film. Now, I like Zoe Kravitz. I think she can play a badass female lead role or a supporting role, especially with films like Mad Max Fury Road. But when I saw her in this film, I thought she was perfectly casted for this version of Catwoman. I thought her character motivations for being in the story made sense, especially with her father being Carmine Falcone and her friend going missing, so she wants to find her friend, so that's why she's going on this journey with Batman to do so. Also, the relationship, romantically speaking, with Batman and Catwoman in this movie, it was subtle, it wasn't overdone. I liked that there was like sexual tension throughout, but the thing I most appreciated about this Bat and Cat relationship was Batman never reveals his secret identity to Catwoman. I like that. Finally, the dude doesn't give up his identity. Thank you, Batman. You stuck to your guns. But the one question I do have about her character is, where did she learn all of her parkour and fighting skills from? Being a waitress at a nightclub? I don't know. Now, the weakest portion of this film is going into the third act, where it feels like the pacing gets a little bit jarring and odd, and there's a lot of ups and downs and slow points, and it sort of feels like the momentum of the movie is sucked out of it at one point, and it almost feels a little bit too overly episodic. And what I mean by that is, this movie felt like it was written to be a 5-part series, but rather than do that, they condensed it down into a 3-hour movie. There's segments every 45 minutes in this movie where you could cap it off, put some end credits on it, and start up the next episode right after that. And at one point, I think somebody might do that. Like, I'd like to see a fan edit of that. And that's not necessarily a major complaint by any means. It's just an observation. But I will say, during the third act of this movie, it felt like the movie that never wanted to end. And I enjoyed the majority of it, but it almost felt like, rather than being a third act of a movie, it felt like a fourth act of a movie. It's like, just when you think it's all over and everything's resolved, but wait, there's more. And once again, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed a lot of the things that went down in the fourth act of this movie. It just felt like all my energy was expelled before it got there, and I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of tired and I just peed my pants, but let's keep going. Let's talk about the final act of this film, and it's one big action sequence where the Riddler's plan comes to fruition, and he blows up the seawalls of Gotham, flooding everything. By the way, just terrible city planning on Gotham's part. Like the only thing separating the ocean from your city or the harbor is like a brick wall. I don't know. It just seems like some villain's going to come along and do that. Like, what would stop the next 5 villains in Gotham City from like, oh, you know what? I'm going to blow up the seawall too. Because that caused a lot of chaos and destruction. I don't know. But either way, as far as that final showdown goes of Batman trying to save the day against the Riddler's goons, I really enjoyed that because they sort of get the best of him, and then Catwoman comes along and helps save the day. But at one point when Batman is down and out and he thinks he's finally done it and he's like, it almost looks like he's about to die, and then he sees Catwoman is in danger. I liked that sequence where he takes the adrenaline and injects himself. It sort of reminded me of the scene in Kick-Ass 2 where Hit Girl does the exact same thing, which I enjoy. And as far as that adrenaline shot goes that Batman took, there's a lot of theories going around that that's actually Bane's venom, and some people are like, no, it's adrenaline. Why can't it be both? Why can't Bane's venom in this universe essentially be an adrenaline shot, but this version of Bane would just be a guy jacked up on adrenaline all the time who's huge and muscular and doesn't feel any pain and never stops? I don't know. Can we see Bane in the next movie? Or maybe the third movie? I'd like another version of Bane. So when it comes to the film The Batman, this is pure cinema. This is a version of Batman I've always wanted to see. It's grounded, it's simplistic, but the thing I most enjoy about it is it just feels like a really good story that happens to have Batman in it as this vigilante, and I've always been a sucker for vigilante movies, and I think they got the tone of this right. Even the visual styles by Matt Reeves directing this film, I just like the way it looks. It doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel overly glossy and CG. It just feels like a real movie with a great story, with characters living in this universe, in this atmosphere. I just bought into it. But overall, when it comes to the Batman, I actually enjoyed the movie more the second time I watched it. I loved it the first time, but the second time around, little details made more sense. And if the plan is to make this into a trilogy, which I only assume they are, and this is sort of like the Batman Begins of that trilogy, and the next installment could be something like The Dark Knight, just imagine where they can go with this story and what they can do. It gets me excited. I gotta put the Batman jacket back on for this. I'm going to give the Batman... I know it had a few issues, and I know I had a few complaints, but they're so minor in a 3-hour film where overall it's a glorious film that overshadows those little nitpicks I have. And this is a movie I feel like watching again. Like, I watched it the second time and I sort of had the urge the next day to go back and revisit it again. And I can't wait until the 4K comes out so I can just sit at home in my underwear and just immerse myself into this movie once again. And the great thing is, when you watch this movie at home in the future, you can pause it to actually go to use the bathroom. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and if justice is blind, don't turn a blind eye. Make sure you subscribe, leave your thoughts, your opinions down below. Give the video a like because YouTube likes that for some odd reason, and I do too. Take care, guys, and I'll see you next time.